amongst others. He's both an engineer and a computer scientist by training, and graduated from the University of Lagos as an engineer and has attended several management programs at Harvard, London, and Lagos business schools. So welcome to the panel, Mr. Omoboyede Olusanya. I wonder if you could tell us a bit more about what Flour Mills does to work with SMEs.
Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be on the panel. I prefer that you called me by my short name, Boye. I think Omoboyede gets it. But yes, from a Flour Mills perspective, largely, apart from dealing with SMEs and services, the biggest part for us is on the supply chain side. And on the supply chain side, there are two big areas of concern that we're worried about. One is supply chain in terms of input raw materials for factory processes, and the other is on the route to market. And in particular, on the route to market side, we're interested in supporting SMEs on Salesforce automation, inventory management, in order for them to be able to get goods from us in a timely manner, and for them to also then be able to understand how their inventory ties into our demand planning. That's the biggest key focus area for us.
Thank you very much for that. And boy, they definitely have noted the name. So next, I'd like to introduce Uzoma Dozie, who's a banker and tech investor, and also a financial inclusion advocate. He's the CEO and founder of Sparkle Microfinance Bank, who's organizing this webinar. As a technology advocate, Uzoma is passionate about connecting individuals and businesses with digital solutions to improve their financial business and lifestyle activities. Uzoma, welcome to the panel, and thank you for organizing this webinar. I wonder if you could tell us briefly what Sparkle does to work with SMEs. Thank you.
Thank you, Lily. I think in a nutshell, what we're trying to do is leverage on technology to make it easier for small businesses to not only carry out their financial transactions, but also their non-financial business support services, and bringing their data into one single platform. So on the Sparkle platform, not only do you, so I think knowing that SMEs today are more mobile and agile than they were before, you don't need a physical space. We're built a platform that allows them to carry their business in their pocket wherever they are. So your location is actually in your pocket. And that's essentially what we're trying to do. And to do that, we're also connecting with different partners to achieve that, knowing that I think the solution to SMEs is not just one single platform, but it's similar platforms connected to each other to try and drive that.
Thank you for that. Allow me to introduce our next speaker, Otto Williams, who is the Senior Vice President, Head of Product Partnerships and Digital Solutions at Visa. He's an energetic people builder and executive of over 20 years professional experience. He's a strategic thinker who loves to create order out of chaos with a broad and deep understanding of fintech, payments, innovation, venture investing, and digital solutions delivery. He has international experience in the United States, North Africa, and Sub-Saharan Africa, as well as Russia. And he's been leading teams to deliver innovation in payments, working with global banks, strategic partners, and fintech to drive digital currency growth across the world. So Otto, welcome to the panel. It's great to have you with us. If you could tell us in a nutshell what Visa does to work with SMEs, and then we'll get started with the panel. Thank you.
Absolutely, thank you, Leili, and great to be on this panel with such a wonderful group. So, our approach to this is creating efficient access to capital, one, at different stages of SME business growth, and two, to also support gender diverse businesses. This is really important to us, and I'll speak more about that. And to also promote inclusive economic growth by providing access to digital acceptance infrastructure, by creating financial literacy and business skills programs that SMEs can tap into, and through a number of different activities. And so if you think about the work that we do, what Uzoma mentioned earlier, i.e. Sparkle and the infrastructure that he's using to enable SMEs, we help Uzoma to be able to deliver and to go to market with those solutions and to empower those SMEs If you think about what the flour mills is doing with its supplier, small business supplier base, how can we accelerate liquidity to that base of suppliers and through various banking relationships that we have? And with what Carl is doing with MTN as well, he's got many micro, small businesses who want to open up access to global consumers to be able to make purchases on a global basis and give those businesses that are in Nigeria access to global consumers. And that again is where Visa comes in to be able to provide that global access to commerce and purchases. And so we'll talk a little bit more about this, but these are some of the areas that we're focused in, and we just believe that this segment is going to drive real growth for economies and for our business going forward.
Thank you very much, Otto. So we're going to start the webinar now, and I'd like to make sure that all our panelists are on video. And please make sure that you check the chat buttons in case that there's any messages being sent to you from the back end. And thank you to all our guests that are tuning in online. We're seeing all of your messages on the chat. So I see different types of people from Lagos, from Ogun State. We see you, and we definitely appreciate you being here with us. So I'm really grateful to all the panelists for telling us more specifically how their businesses or institutions work with SMEs. I think that's important for the people at home and the audience to understand, so that we can get right into a conversation. So one of the things that comes up immediately when we talk about SME financing or SME growth or support for SMEs, the complaint is usually that access to credit remains the #1 issue that SMEs face in Nigeria and worldwide. Financial institutions typically give credit, but most SMEs feel like they can't rely on their banks to provide affordable credits. And as we mentioned earlier, there's a $136 billion funding gap. So I just wanted to get everybody's thoughts on this, more specifically NECA and Uzoma. NECA being part of the Enterprise Development Center, as well as Uzoma working at Sparkle and owning Sparkle and understanding the issues that SMEs face. So what are your thoughts on the fact that the #1 issues that SMEs in Nigeria face and worldwide is essentially access to credit, and what is currently being done about that? So that question is for NECA and for Uzoma. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Lele. So for the SMEs, they always say that their #1 challenge is access to credit. And I think the reason why EDC and Sparkle embarked on this research was to actually find out whether that actually is a problem. And one thing was very, very clear. In looking at access to credit, there's many things to consider. You see a lot of approvals of the loans at the banks, but they hardly ever come and take those loans. So is it access to credit that is a challenge, or the ability for them to be able to draw down on the loans that have been approved? So I think that was one of the major reasons for us, because for as long as Entrepreneurship Center and business service providers to entrepreneurs, you feel you know what the problem is, that's a problem itself. So we need to find out, understand exactly what the challenge was for them. So access to credit, yes, on a global level, but simple things like documentation, simple things like their taxes, their structures, the talent, and even the ability for their organization to be able to absorb that type of fund. Those were the issues that we found when we did the research.
Thank you very much for that. Uzoma, I don't know if you wanted to answer the question about access to credit for SMEs.
I'll just add to what Nick has said that, like you hear a lot about, there's lots of money for small businesses, but they can't actually access it. And why they can't access it, like fundamentally I think the issue is data and information. We don't have enough information or to take a right decision. And so you have a lot of small businesses that are worthy of loans that are not getting it or not getting enough, and you have people that are not worthy and are getting it, and that's because one is information. Two is the structure and the process in which we we look at small businesses cannot be the same for corporate organizations or individuals. It has to be a different type. And then and I think today we have to start using different data points as well, not the traditional ones that we see. And then leveraging off, and there's data everywhere. It's just how do you get it? It's data about every business, but how do you get it? It's pulling that data from the telcos, because the telcos have enough data about a big business. It's pulling that data from even your suppliers, because they do have it. So what you normally typically hear is that, okay, come and do a transaction with us for bank with us for about 3 months before we give you a loan. I think we have to look at other ways in which we can actually access data from different data points within our ecosystem and be able to apply it to make better decisions on yes or no, how much should we lend to you?
Thank you very much for that. So before I go on and talk about data, because that's a very important point, I'd like to talk about financial inclusion, because that's something that I think touches 3 different particular guests, if not all of them. So the question is directed at Carl, the CEO of MTN. So essentially, the debate on who is responsible for financial inclusion is ongoing. Some believe that financial inclusion should be bank-led, while others argue that it should be telco-led due to the mobile penetration in sub-Saharan Africa. So usually, mobile money is primarily led by telcos, and they've been instrumental in bridging financial inclusion gaps in lots of countries such as Kenya, Senegal, Egypt, India. Here in Nigeria, we've kind of struggled with the CBN on, I guess, for PSB licensing that is cohesive for all stakeholders. This PSB licensings are supposed to be issued in the next 6 months. And just looking at financial service value for MTN and what that could actually mean for inclusion in the country, which includes SMEs and small businesses. What are your plans to serve SMEs when the time finally comes that the PSB licenses are issued and working?
So first of all, let me just clarify that the status of the PSB with us now is we have an approval in principle. We are eternally optimistic that we'll have the final approval maybe in 6 to 12 months, but that's firmly in the hands of the Central Bank of Nigeria. The second thing I want to say is, you see, financial inclusion, where you compare to countries like Kenya, where they really kicked off 10, 12 years ago with their M-Pesa solution, is quite different from where we are today in Nigeria. The honest truth is, the financial ecosystem is significantly advanced, sometimes I think much more so in the Western world, in some spaces in Nigeria. And if you look at the number of accounts that large banks like Access Bank, First Bank, etc. hold, you'll see that there's a lot that has been done in terms of financial inclusion. So the PSB, what are we looking at? First, let me be clear that at least in the initial stages, we'll be focusing on the truly unbanked, many of which are in the rural areas, probably a slightly lower level of awareness of financial solutions than you find in urban areas. And we have the distribution reach, as well as the financial muscle to spend time educating and building trust with these. And so we need to get all of those on board and work with the traditional deposit money banks and the microfinance banks to jointly offer solutions. The PSB is not a panacea and a do-all and be-all for banking. So we were going to have to work very constructively. And it's pretty much around what Uzoma has spoken about. Between the banking industry and the telecoms industry, you understand the financial patterns of your customers. When does their cash flow hit? When does their expenditure happen? What is their source of cash flow? Telco can tell you information about recharge, information about the kind of information they're willing to access, and that must be done within the regulations of privacy in Nigeria, I must point out. It can tell you about movement of customers, and it can also make transparent things like, who are your customer base? What do they want to consume? How frequently do they want to consume it? And what is your SME's potential customers' financial capabilities, which can even take us to the extent that SMEs start to provide their own customers credit. So there's an abundance of data in both of the telco and financial ecosystem the person that's going to make magic out of this is the person that can turn data into wisdom, because the data is out there, but not many people have successfully been able to transform and structure this data in a manner that you can use it for consumers, for SMEs. So if you see the power of, let us look at maybe 4 institutions here. Boye running flour mills, the largest food company in Nigeria, and a massive distribution network, who understands who his distributors are and who the end consumers are. You take Uzoma and Sparkle, that understands the different type of data points and lending structures that you need for smaller customers. And someone like Access Bank, who has a ton of information about the traditional banking space, cash flows, etc. If we can convert all this data into wisdom, then I think we can really create a magic formula that can transform the SME world and fix the problem about access to capital. Thank you.
Thank you, Carl. Definitely collaboration and data will be very key, which brings me to another way that essentially can help SMEs thrive, which is fintech. And the next question essentially is for Otto over at Visa. What is fintech's role in simplifying, the business processes for SMEs? In addition to what the speakers have spoken about in terms of data, the telco industry, the banking industry, and just collaboration in general.
Absolutely. Great question, actually. And I fully agree with all the points that have been made earlier, especially around data. It's one thing, you can have access to data, but if you're not having pure crude, it's useless if you can't really refine it to create byproducts that industries and consumers need. And it's the exact same thing with data. And fintechs have actually been stepping into the space. And if you think about the challenges that SMEs have had over time, and we've looked at this across multiple markets, we're actually starting to see a lot of transformation as fintechs have been stepping in, and regulators have actually been making change. I'll give credit to regulators here because we've seen them do things that have actually helped to transform the space and help fintechs thrive. And an example of that would be the BVN in Nigeria. I think that's really helped to onboard fintechs at a much more rapid pace than we've seen in the past. Onboarding, paper onboarding of fintechs, and you talked about it earlier, access to capital. Yes, you can't really underwrite if fintechs don't have digital transaction and payment records that banks can actually use to underwrite risk. And so that's one area. And so how do you onboard fintechs to be digitally enabled and to digitally accept? And we've seen, SMEs, and we've seen fintech step in to accelerate that. And some of the things like digital identity or digital KYC, which the BVN enables, and we've seen numerous such digital solutions across many markets have helped to rapidly onboard SMEs to be able to go digital. And that's exactly what Sparkle has been doing. Now, once you've been able to onboard fintechs, how do you now start to digitally allow them to be able to accept payments? And it's things like money movement, whether it's mobile money, POS acceptance, digitizing e-commerce flows, whether you're a flour mills distributor and you want to be able to digitally accept payments, and also digitally pay the supplier. And that allows you to be able to digitize those flows, which banks can actually see, and lenders, not just banks, by the way, we've got alternative lenders as well, can actually see those flows and bring liquidity funding in to help SMEs with their third challenge, which is working capital. That is extremely important. SMEs need access to working capital. And so having digitizing onboarding, digitizing payment flows allows us to be able to provide funding liquidity to solve working capital challenges. Now, once all of that is in place, there's an important piece that you can't overlook in this entire journey. And that is, how do you help SMEs manage fraud and risk? Now, because fraud and risk will wipe out any business. And that's where bringing and having that infrastructure where SMEs can monitor their flows and also be able to risk rate transactions that are coming in so that they can be better protected, that too is critical. And then you wrap all of that in financial literacy and business skills. How do you take your business from just that nascent startup into growth phase, and where you can actually hire more employees, manage payroll, manage inventory, and manage working capital better? So it's all continuum. And that is the way that we approach it. That's how we look at it. And that's why we're constantly collaborating with ecosystem partners to be able to drive this financial supply chain to empower SMEs. And Fintechs are a key player in that entire continuum that I've just described.
Thank you, Otto. Definitely appreciate the FinTech perspective. It's seeming like collaboration will definitely be key to really help SMEs get to where they need to get to. So Boye, I'd like to come over to you. So from the Enterprise Development Center's research, we note that about 35% of businesses use informal sources of credit, one of which is supplier credit. What metrics do Flour Mills Nigeria consider while vetting companies and their value chains for suppliers' credits? As we know, financial literacy and education is important for SMEs, and a lot of the reasons why loans are not approved are usually because of documentation purposes and people not having the information that they need to really get approved. So could you talk to us about the metrics that Flour Mills considers while vetting companies for supplier credit? Thank you.
Thanks, Leila. I think first to comment briefly on what everyone has said and the importance in particular of data. But in speaking about data, they keep forgetting that I'm also a veritable source of data, which would then lead me to the answer to your question, because I've been sitting down now for over 60 years with a lot of distributors and a lot of information as to what their capital needs have been and what their ability to sell has been. So I've got a rich amount of data. Now that data, which in part of the collaboration will be useful to solve, before I come back to my question, to solve a significant amount of problems that I need solved for them in the sense of governance and access to working capital. This is from my distributor's perspective, who wants to be able to get goods at the right time and to be able to manage his inventory in such a way as he optimizes his business value. Now, everything that's been said relates to that. If he gets better capital, if I get better sight of his inventory, all of that work towards actually giving him a more efficient business. Now, what are the things I look at? I look at his history, what he sells, the market he sells in, because not only do I know the volume of what he does, I know his volume by location or her volume by location. I know the product categories of what moves for him or her. And if he comes to me with a value proposition that says he needs to extend or expand his market, those parameters that I have of his history are what allow me to determine how he is able to how I'm able to place a certain amount of credit risk with him. The credit will come from my ability to see his ability to grow the business. The risk management comes from the history of his, whether it's repayment cycle you look at, or his working capital turnaround time, which is what I see on a daily basis. So yes, I look through my own, in quotes, data that I hold and use that to make certain credit decisions for a particular distributor. What would be better in the long run, as we're discussing here, is that decision should not just be mine. I should be able to put my balance sheet on the line to defend my distributor, but that decision should be we can make on the basis of a total composite view of that distributor's business. And I presume that's the real essence of this discussion. How do we get to that kind of platform that allows that to occur? What do I want as a business? I want to get to the point where I'm purely a demand-driven business as opposed to a product-driven business. And demand drive will only come from the amount of information that I can get from the consumer through the distributor to me to make those production decisions.
Thank you very much, Boye. Definitely, I think most SMEs definitely want to get to being demand-driven. So we're going to take a poll just for the audience. You have a minute max for each question, and then we'll continue on to the next part of the program. So the question one, as you'll see on your screen, what do you think is the major challenge SMEs in Nigeria are facing? So please pick whether it's access to finance or access to markets. So we'll give you about 1 minute to answer that, and then continue on to solutions and really what we can do to bridge this SME gap that we're currently facing. So if at the back end, so again, what do you think is the major challenge SMEs in Nigeria are facing? You either pick access to finance or access to markets, and then we can close that poll. All right, great. Thank you so very much. So thank you to all our panelists for their contributions. I think it's really great to understand everyone's perspective on the topic that we're discussing today. And before we go over to questions from the audience, I'd like to come back to Nneka. Nneka, you were very involved in this research. And obviously you understand why it's important for this kind of work to be out there. So I wonder if, based on the discussions that we've had, what are some of the solutions that you were able to uncover? And what are your thoughts on what we can do to support SMEs better? We've heard everyone talk about the need for collaboration and the need to utilize data. So I just want to hear your thoughts from your perspective.
Okay, so thank you very much, Leila, for that. So I think one thing that we've seen is that we need to see more innovation coming from the banking products and services being delivered to the entrepreneurs. And so I know what some of the banks are doing now is they're able to give loans quicker and faster to their clients. But I think the adoption of technology for proper record keeping and accessibility is something that quite more of the banks can do with the apps that they have, because a major challenge with having so many approvals and not enough disbursement is the fact that we've seen that our entrepreneurs don't have the documentation, they don't have the data. We can't keep overemphasizing that. Then another thing is the fact that we can pull the services together, the support services. So these will be services coming from the business development service providers that quite a number of the financial institutions are probably using. And see how we can work with the entrepreneurs in clusters. So when I say in clusters, in terms of the sectors that they belong to, because you'll find that there'll be some common threads of needs and gaps in those. And in doing that, of course, these BDSPs would be service providers that the bank has vetted, they've verified, and these entrepreneurs can have access to. And then lastly, groupage. When I say groupage, so I saw a comment in the chat box around tax and things like that and affordability. So there's power in numbers. So quite a number of the main challenge actually for MSMEs is access. It's access to talent, it's access to the right type of talent that can help them, access to market, access to useful data, and access to financial literacy. So by having BDSPs that they can work with in clusters, they can break that bill. So these are just some of the things that we're doing on some of the projects that we are running with some multilateral organizations, and we're seeing that it's working. So by the time you're able to help the entrepreneurs understand the need to have proper documentation, understand the need to have their structures and their SOPs and their systems, understand the need to audit. A lot of them wonder, why should I pay that money to audit? Well, you need to. There's some transactions that you're going to go after, and they're going to ask for that. So you need that. So by the time we have them matched with BDSPs that can provide services at discounted rates, and they're fully using technology for their record keeping. Also, yes, I mustn't forget this, regulatory issues. Most of them, they were hiding from the taxman. They can't do that anymore. So they have to wake up to the fact that they have to give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar. And then lastly, start the conversation around succession.
All really great points. And I hope that the SMEs that are here in the audience took some notes. So for me, we have about 20 minutes left on this webinar, and we'd like to also give the audience an opportunity to ask some questions. But before I do that, I'd like to ask one last question. As we're talking about SMEs and, helping simplifying their processes and their businesses, I just wonder, in terms of being able to expand business practices, across the continent or across the world, what can really be done for someone in Nigeria to one day be able to, pay or have customers across the continent, in a seamless way? I'll just ask that question and then go over to Q&A. So this is open to Uzoma and Otto to really talk about just, expanding borders beyond Nigeria. Thank you.
I'll let Otto start off first because he plays across many markets.
Yeah, sure. No, absolutely. Thanks. That's a great question, and it's critical. I think expanding borders across Nigeria, we have to look at it in from multiple lenses. One is funding and liquidity. So how do you actually help SMEs and startups to gain access to funding and liquidity outside of Nigeria? That's one aspect. And one of the ways that we've actually been doing this at Visa is we have a program we've been running for a few years now called Visa Everywhere Initiative. And so far we've had over 8,000 startups, small companies that have been participating in it, and collectively they've raised over $16 billion in global venture funding. It gives them visibility, it gives them access to global capital and to global investors. I think that's critical. And we put funding to it as well. This year, we're going to put $500,000 in prize money just to make sure that we can encourage participation and give these startups that visibility. So access to global funding outside of Nigeria is critical. And you've seen some of the investments that we've made in Nigeria and Fintechs that, has eventually led to them being acquired by, global players as well. And so that's one aspect. The other aspect is access to purchase or consumers that need to purchase outside of Nigeria. And you've got a small business within Nigeria that's doing well, maybe thriving, but could be, we've got 3 billion credentials, Visa credentials out there globally that could actually be making purchases with the small enterprise. And so how do you give that small enterprise access to a few 100 million potential buyers if the goods and services are relevant? And that's where we have to be able to digitize small businesses and bring them into e-commerce to enable that. And we've been doing that at scale we've got a CyberSource asset that enables small businesses to be able to go global via e-commerce. And, this used to be nice to have 2-3 years ago until COVID hit. And every small, medium enterprise realized that digital is not an option. It's a must-have. Because even if you're selling goods offline and there's lockdown happening within your market or your community, people actually can't show up to purchase whatever you're selling. And so how do you actually collect your payments even if you can make deliveries? And so this has become critical, and we actually have to enable SMEs with this kind of access. And then lastly, I would say, small suppliers that need to be able to move, you've got a lot of small Nigerian small businesses that are actually purchasing from overseas and making those purchases. How do you move capital back and forth? And we've been using B2B payment platforms. We've actually got one that's built on blockchain called B2B Connect that we've been using to help businesses move money cross-border, and remittances on our Visa Direct platform as well. And so these are various aspects. And you really have to open up small businesses to the global opportunities that exist for them. And that's what we've been doing.
Thank you so much, Otto. Appreciate that.
So quickly, I think Otto has touched on a big part, which is standards and conforming to standards in payments and also communication. Because as a business today, if I want to pay someone, there must be certain standards. And so it means that whole value chain from the customer, which is small business, to the banks, and to the end user must actually be communicating communicating on a, should I say, leveraging on technology and a digital platform. So it means that me as a small business must adopt digital payments, ways to pay and not cash payments. The bank must be able to process customers' requests from a digital perspective. So it means that if I want to borrow money, it really should be me trying to borrow money as an individual today without actually any human intervention. And this has to be done because small businesses, I mean, like if you look at Nigeria, small businesses account for about, I think about over 41 micro small businesses in Nigeria. You cannot use a human solution to solve their problem. It has to be a digital solution so you can scale it down in a cost-effective manner and minimizing operational risk. And that means standards and norms, especially if you want to play across border. And so as a small business, I have to think, how do I connect to the existing infrastructure? As a bank, I'm thinking, how do I look at my tools, my processes, so that I can actually accommodate these large businesses with various requests in a way that is cost effective and is also safe. And I think that's what needs to be done from if we're actually going to leverage cross-border opportunities.
Thank you, Zoma, for that. Very great point. It seems that we're kind of all saying the same thing, that collaboration is key, and that will really be the key to figuring this SME issue out. So I'd like to also take some questions from the audience so that we can have this be as collaborative as possible. There's a few questions here. So the first question that I see is for Boye. Is there a program for FMN, to support SMEs that have certain synergies with e.g. bakeries, restaurants? If not, would you be interested in such a partnership? So if you could answer that. There's also another question here for you. Is there a manufacturer, is a manufacturer such as NNFM open to a strategic partnership to drive value chain trade data such as these SMEs to help them to continue to grow? So I'll have you answer the first question first about programs that support SMEs that have certain synergies with your company and institution.
I thought you were going to be nice to me. The second question is easier to answer first. So that's
sorry.
The answer. We would be open. And today there is a significant amount of companies who are creating platforms for trade that makes sense for us as a business to be interested and involved in. Long term, as we move towards more using e-systems, as you would call them, as a distribution platform, then those kind of ventures become very relevant. So today, we actively do seek to collaborate and partner with people on that. So the answer to that is yes. On the first question, yes, we collaborate significantly with a significant amount of SMEs with us in different ways now. Because of the nature of products and services they take from us, we are involved actively in training, and in particular training on governance and training on how best to financially manage their business. The more successful they are in managing those businesses, the more products they take from us. We would also always be looking to, today we're also looking to support them in terms of certain CapEx infrastructure to support inventory management, especially as that drives their demand forecast towards us and the ability to pick products. But it's not closed. It's an open system that we continue to look for ways to invest in creating the best environment for them to be able to thrive.
Thank you, Boye, for that. And I hope that answers your question to Demi, who asked the question. So we have a question for Carl here. I think it's in relation to what you had said about transforming data into wisdom. So somebody here is asking, how can we transform financial data into wisdom specifically?
Well, I think if I had the perfect answer for that solution, I would have gone to set up my own startup. I'm planning retirement in 5 years' time when I'm a unicorn. Look, but the basics of it are, you have to understand from a completely different perspective how SMEs can be measured in terms of taking a risk on them for extension of financial facilities, and that's one part of it. You have to be able to segment the data and split up what is relevant to the key decisions that you want to make. And use each of those metrics to determine whatever your decision might be. It might be credit, it might be investing in a distributor to grow their business. But you have to be able to translate that into effectively some sort of scoring algorithm to provide the financial solutions for SMEs. And there's a lot to be learned by some of the more traditional microfinance banks who go out to a trader who doesn't have an education but has a good distribution business, let's say with flour mills, and in form of collateral, they actually visit their homes to understand how long have they been there, are they known in the neighborhood, do they have a TV, a fridge, a generator, etc., etc. So putting all of this together and translating it with the help of two things: a proper understanding of the business that these people are doing, and how to segment data. So data analytics is two critical aspects. And then you have to tie in more than one industry. You have to get the banking industry, you have to get the microfinance banking industry's data, you have to get the telcos data, and then people who interface with a significant number of corporates, as I used flour mill, so not corporates, excuse me, SMEs, as I use flour mills as an example, and then lock that in. That is not something that many of us in our traditional roles would have the open-mindedness, the breadth of thinking to be able to transform that data into wisdom, which is why we haven't really done it successfully yet. But with this generation of very data aware, very analytical, innovative thinking, tech savvy people, I am sure somebody either within our institutions or somebody as a startup will come up with that solution and nail it on the head. And trust me, it's not going to be very long.
Thank you, Carl, for that answer. Appreciate that. We have another question here saying, how do we properly utilize our data to access loans? Proper audited financials are expensive to implement for most SMEs. So is there a way that we can leverage transaction volume turnover instead? So that question, Uzoma, you're the banker here. So if you could answer that, thank you.
And I think that's a great question because, I mean, really, I think the whole, I mean, like if you look at how we lend to big, large corporates and individuals, we actually don't ask them to give. We for example, if a bank lends to an MTN, their records are already they are public, so they can actually access that information themselves without actually asking the MTNs of this world. Individuals are the same. You actually access your records based on their transaction, and then you make a decision. For small businesses, the information is everywhere, and so it is creating a platform that gives you access to their information without them actually giving it to you, because that's where collusion and maybe some operational risk might come into play. And that's why one of the things that the regulator has actually initiated, open banking, is actually going to help us aggregate data not only from financial institutions but non-financial, as Carl has been talking about, so that we can make this informed decision. But it means that for the small business themselves, everything has to be practically online. So it means that they should start accepting payments from a digital perspective. It means that they should be capturing and tracking the records of their employees as well, and their sales and their distributors, so that when I'm looking at the business, I'll look at his whole working, and which is what we're talking about, his whole working capital asset from a point of view that I don't actually, that it's cheap. I mean, like, all I have to do is take a look into his world. And that's one of the reasons why we build the Sparkle platform for small business, because it takes their financial and non-financial data and puts it in one place, so that when you're looking at it, it is cost effective. It is me looking at it, it's other people looking at it and making an informed decision without actually having the customer to explain or to incur additional costs. And so for small businesses, it's, listen, as somebody said earlier, if you're not digital or you're not leveraging technology or you're not capturing your data in the digital form, then it's going to be very difficult for you to exist or compete in the new world ahead.
Thank you for that, Uzama. That's definitely a great point. And that just brings in inclusion as well, because the truth is not everybody is online. So that's going to create probably an exclusion gap. But I guess it's important to encourage SMEs to be online and to have data that can be tracked. So thank you for that. So we have, and there's somebody that's asking here if Sparkle gives out loans to SMEs. If you could just answer that before I go to the next question.
In about 3 months, so in about 3 months, I will be giving out loans to start doing those transactions so we can actually, as Carl said, take that financial data and turn it into wisdom to say yes to you when you apply.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. So I have a question here for Boye. So essentially, how can you encourage the youth who are working hard, especially in the aspect of agriculture, to see that they can actually have success in small business in agriculture? Some of the youth find it difficult to access good market pricing of the produce. So essentially, what's your advice to a young entrepreneur who wants to get into the agri business?
First advice is don't give up on it, because it is actually one of the best sectors to get into now. Why do I see this, and how would it work? We continue to look at agri from a pure value chain point of view. So you've got a value chain end to end. We play on the more scalable part of the value chain, but for that part of the value chain to survive, it needs a supply chain that works, and a supply chain that guarantees input materials on an annual basis, not a stop-start supply chain. And that supply chain is therefore, reliant on local products and local materials, which is where back to agriculture here comes in, or farming comes in. And the ability for any group, collective, individual to be able to consistently produce at a better yield and better quality those products will guarantee offtake from an industry player who wants to ensure that his supply chain gives him good quality products. Today, we continue to look at relationships, whether it's with cooperatives or outgrower schemes or specific farming programs that are small in size, small, not necessarily big in size and scale, but are efficiently run and produce products at the right quality and with the right yield. Now, where would this work for someone who's coming in from a young perspective? The technology to understand the best type of seeds to use, the best type of input crop protection or input materials to use to guarantee the best yield, which makes the economics work better for them, but B, makes the quality of the product better for an off-taker like me, who will then do it at a commercial price because it makes sense for me based on the quality of the output I will then be able to sell. So in a nutshell, that's the program that they should be following.
Thank you for that. And I hope that that was helpful for Ishak, who sent in that question. So we're getting close to the end of the time. So I'd just like to hear from all the panelists, just your advice that you have for SMEs. And I know that there's other questions that are here, but unfortunately we can't answer them all, but I'm sure that you can take these questions offline. So from each panelist, I'm going to start with Nneka. In under 30 seconds, your advice for SMEs in 2022. So over to you.
Thank you very much. My advice to SMEs is just keep at it. And for the youths out there, there's so many programs and projects that can provide clarity. For those in agri, in creatives, please check out www.edc.edu.ng. We have a transformational program for youths that will help you with access to information, access to market, and access to consulting services, especially for the gentleman that asked about agri, as well as subsidized rates. But stay at it and keep focused. Thank you.
Thank you, Nneka. Otto, we'd love to hear from you.
Absolutely. I think it's been said here, digitize for access. That's important. It makes data available for liquidity providers to be able to score you. And in that world that Carl hoped for, frankly, has arrived. Fintechs are doing it. They're bringing underwriting platforms, because that's part of the challenge that exists today. Banks are not, frankly, just don't have the infrastructure to underwrite such high frequency, small ticket loans. And so you have fintechs that are building those underwriting platforms to be able to service those loans. And so digitize for access so that that data is available and liquidity and funding providers can actually score you and provide that access. and then, build a practical money and business skills. There's a lot more to it, especially as your business starts to see growth and expansion. You're going to need that. It's payroll, it's inventory management, it's working capital management, and all of that stuff. And these tools and resources are available. Visa has one, it's called Practical Business Skills, and it's free, it's online, and you can access that as well.
Thank you, Otto. Carl, we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, clearly coming from telecommunications industry, digitization is a big part of what we recommend you to do. Digitization of your advertising, and we offer solutions on specialized mobile advertising, which are really starting to accelerate now. But to step away from my MTN role, I would advise every SME to understand the basic concepts of finance and financial statements. Too often, Nigerian businesses confuse cash flow for profitability, and understand that extremely clearly. As we are living in an information and digitized age, the more you can look for data within your own business that demonstrates your consistent and growing cash flow and the growth potential of your customer base, of your product scale up, et cetera, is critical. And I think sort of to align with what Otto said, you must be able to learn and relearn and rethink things on a continuous basis. I've spoken about financial analysis, financial statements, financial reporting, but how is the rest of the world? How are the most progressive businesses out there using the information age to really accelerate and transform their business and use it to access capital as well? So those are my key bits of advice. Thank you.
Thank you, Carl. Definitely some great points there. Thanks for that. So Uzoma, we'd like to, maybe we'll close with Uzoma, and Boye, if we could hear from you, please. Thank you.
Well, without repeating, I think a lot of what Carl said, but more importantly for SMEs, that today, with the access or with the information platforms that exist, the ability to deal with the governance issues that we're talking about that drive their ability to raise capital easily will never be better. Whether it's knowledge or whether it's platforms that allow you to fill out salary pay slips online, whether it's platforms that allow you to keep track of inventory online. For instance, we continue to invest in Salesforce automation tools for them. These are all tools that are readily available that give them structure without them needing to be complicated structures. Someone's talking about audited financial statements. Today, they can get simple applications that they use on a day-to-day basis that can pseudo provide some level of audited financials, which put them in the best position to get access to some level of funding and financing. And for all of us as a country, the reality is growth will come from a structure that allows credit to be given. Credit drives real growth in the economy. And we all need to create that environment for growth. It will allow me to produce more, sell more, but it means there's more consumption that goes on. And those are the tools that the SMEs have that will enable them to get access and tap into that. So buy into the technology age today. It will give you all those governance tools that you need at an affordable cost.
Thank you, and well said. And Uzoma, over to you.
Okay, thank you. And we're all saying that the world is going digital, and what does digital mean? I mean, to me, from my personal perspective, digital is cashless, it's paperless, and it's now touchless with the advent of COVID. And so, as a business, as anybody, as a business today, is how do I become fully digital? How do I ensure that I'm not collecting cash? And all my documents, my processes, or even the ones I get, are captured and I'm put online. And how do I make sure that even payments are not touched? So like are touchless. So we're not talking about cards here or POS. We're talking about things like QR code, NFC. Those are the things actually that are going to give you more freedom, more trust as well, and also more transparency. So as you start your business, the best time to be digital is when your business is small, because when it becomes big, then it becomes expensive and also very, 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 very difficult. So today, the future is digital, and digital is cashless, paperless, and touchless.
Thank you very much, Uzoma, for that. And I think that closes us off pretty nicely. I'd like to thank our audience members for joining us, all the SMEs. I hope that you were able to learn a thing or two from our panel. My name is Lele Balde. It's been a pleasure being your moderator for this session. I'd like to thank our speakers, Neka, Carl, Boye, Otto, and Uzoma for joining us. Definitely appreciate your expertise. And we hope that these conversations will continue both on and offline, and that we continue to try to bridge the gap between SMEs and them actually being the bedrock of our economy, and essentially providing them with simplified business support to enable them to grow and to scale. So thank you very much. It's been great. It's been a great hour. And I know that it's Monday, so everyone's probably very busy. So I won't take up any more of your time. But we definitely appreciate your time and thank all our audience members for staying with us. Again, don't forget to download Sparkle on your Apple Store and your Google Play Store. And yeah, again, my name is Lele Balde, and it's been a pleasure being with you this afternoon. Thank you and have a great week.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Uzoma.
Thank you.
Bye.